When we all say, we go to a temple. Radhika Raman Prabhu, his home was the temple. So his parents started the Wisely ISKCON Center when he and his brother were just very young kids. And he was fully trained in Krishna consciousness as a homeschooled kid by his parents, particularly his mother, Arudhanamji. And he is a child prodigy in ISKCON. He done everything from Srila Prabhupada's books, English, philosophy, history, what else needs, what is there to know. He learned everything from Srila Prabhupada's books. And his mom has written an entire book on homeschooling based on their experience of teaching them through Srila Prabhupada's books. So he graduated from Boise State University at age of 17, receiving his bachelor's degree in both philosophy and math.
Oh,
Just at the age of 17.
Haribol.
And he was the youngest student, he admitted in Oxford University in London, and he got his master's and PhD. He got his PhD at the age of 22.
Haribol.
His contributions to Vaishnavism, particularly Gaudiya Vaishnavism, is tremendous. He has written 4 books. And his PhD himself was on Chaitanya Vaishnavism. And he has done extensive research on Jiva Goswami's Tattva Sandarbha and written books about that. And he has accomplished scholarly. He has got so many awards. Actually, if there's an award, he would have gotten it. So it's very, very accomplished. And whatever he speaks is nectar. In case any of you signed up for any service, don't start attending the class. Then you'll miss all your services. You will not go back to your service. So either go before the class or cut your service and stay here. His classes are so nectarian, even very dry topics like, let's say, for example, how do you defeat impersonalism and things like that, which not many of us being so fond of. Even such hard topics, he makes it so nectarian and so lovingly presented with so much humor. And if not also a teacher, he can impart to anybody in such a sweet and simple manner the complex topics of philosophy. And he's here with his entire family. Actually, his wife Amrita Keli Mataji is here, and his 2 sons again, Sandar Chaitanya and Purushottam. So they are as sweet as himself. And his father is also here. It is such a glorious contribution of their entire family to our movement, and we're so grateful for Prabhu's presence here. And we wish him well throughout his stay here, and we hope to serve you, Prabhu, to make it a pleasant experience. They came all the way from Utah for attending this weekend event for us. Prabhuji is a disciple of His Holiness Panmat Prashika Swami, who is so proud to have such a wonderful disciple accomplished in all respects. So this is what it means to be a disciple, to meet Prabhu, proud of him. So this Prabhu has accomplished it so well. So we invite him to give us Bhagavad Gita class now.
Hare Krishna. So I just wanted to say that Sharu Prabhu's classes and Sri Prahlad Prabhu's kirtans have a couple things in common. One is that you hope they never end, that they keep going on and on. And number 2, they have the capacity to really bring forth a lot of joy from the heart. And your heart just kind of leaps out from inside. And thirdly, they're they both got a very pioneering spirit in terms of their kirtans and classes and so on. You feel like Krishna consciousness is an adventure, and that's the thing I think about most when I listen to Sri Prabhu's kirtans, is how Krishna consciousness is really an adventure. You feel like we could go anywhere, we could do anything, even this remote place in South Texas. We're here and we're dancing and chanting and kirtan and so many devotees and delicious prasad and wonderful activities to do. So it's a very difficult act to follow, and I'm very grateful to Sri Prabhu and Charu Prabhu for their wonderful, inspiring contributions this morning, and of course later this weekend as well. So with that, we'll just do a short Jaya Madhava and then to the talk.
Okay.
Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Gopi Janda Bala Gopi Jana Yashoda Nandana Raja Janara Yashoda Nandana Raja Janara Yashoda Nandana Raja Janara Yashoda Nandam Hare Krishna. So thank you all so much for attending today. And my particular gratitude to the organizers of this weekend's festivals, Govinda Charan Prabhu and his whole team, as well as the cooks as well, who've been giving us wonderful prasadam, Rasvilas Prabhu and another team of cooks and assistants and so on. It's really a lot of hard work that goes into something like this. So I'm very grateful. So I thought, since the theme of the weekend is Bhagavad Gita, we're celebrating Gita Jayanti, of course, which was yesterday, and we recited the full Bhagavad Gita. And I thought that going with that theme, that we could take a little bit of time to reflect on this phrase that was Srila Prabhupada's signature phrase when it came to Bhagavad Gita. There was something he was very particular about and repeated again and again when it came to his translation and commentaries on Bhagavad Gita. And that is the phrase, as it is. Right? Prabhupada said, this is not just Bhagavad Gita, this is Bhagavad Gita as it is. He put that on the cover, he explains it in the introduction, he explains it later on in his purports as well. Like any good author or translator, he explains what sets apart his work from that of others who come before him. So that's what I thought we could reflect on. And in order to do that, I wanted to begin by reading one verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. There are a couple of places in Srimad Bhagavatam where the Bhagavatam itself refers to the Bhagavad Gita. And from that, we get a sense of what the Bhagavad Gita is about, because the Bhagavatam, of course, is the heart of our philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So this is, if you want to look it up, this is Canto 1, and it's chapter 15, and it's verse number 27. So Canto 1, chapter 15, verse number 27. This is Arjuna speaking. And Arjuna has just returned from Dwarka, where he had gone to understand what Krishna's plan is for. So this is the end of, near the end of the Mahabharata. The war has taken place. Pretty much everyone on both sides has been killed. It's been a tragic, tragic loss of life. And the Pandavas are now wondering what they're supposed to be doing with the remainder of their lives, now that this great battle is done. So Arjun goes off to Dwarka to find out from Krishna what his plan is for the rest of his time on this earth. And based on that, the Pandavas need to figure out what they're doing. So this is a good reminder. Please, everyone, turn off your cell phones. If you haven't had a look at your cell phone recently, please do that and turn it on. So he goes to Dwarka, and when he returns, he comes to King Yudhishthira's court, to his brother's court, and he is just heartbroken. His face is, have you, if you have some vases at home, maybe for the deities, right, and you leave them on the altar too long, then the flowers, they start to shrivel up and they kind of bend, and you see an old vase that's really, it was once very beautiful. And you can look at the vase and you can think, wow, how beautiful it must have been when it was fresh. Right? So Bhagavatam describes that Arjuna's heart was like that. When he returned from Dwarka, it was like a vase that had a flower, a lotus flower, that had kind of shriveled up and bent over. And Yudhishthira could see this. And he goes through all these different questions to Arjun. He says, what is it? What is it that has happened that's made you so sad, right? And so unhappy? I've never seen you like this before, so upset. Arjun was always a very victorious person, right? This is his nature. He was victorious in everything he did. He was not used to failing in anything. And he says, you look like you failed in something. Maybe maybe you haven't protected someone who's worthy of protection. Maybe he runs through all these different possibilities. And Arjun doesn't say anything. And at the end of it, Yudhishthira, he figures out the answer. He knows. Just by looking at Arjun's face, he can tell what the problem is. He just doesn't want to believe it, right? He doesn't want to say it because it's so heartbreaking. He says the only reason that you could be this upset is because Krishna has left this world, your dearmost friend. And of course, that's the truth. And Arjun then, at the beginning of this chapter, he starts on this beautiful litany of remembrances of Krishna. How Krishna protected them from Durvasa Muni in the forest when they had nothing to feed, when the Pandavas had nothing to feed Durvasa Muni. How he protected them from the wrath of the mistreatment of Dushasana and Duryodhana. He remembers how Krishna protected him on the battlefield, where there were warriors who were far more powerful than even Arjuna. So he remembers all of Krishna's pastimes. And as he's remembering, his heart is breaking more and more. He's becoming more and more saddened and depressed and feeling this pain of separation. And so he has to do something to help himself and to pick himself back up, as well as, you might imagine, the condition of everyone in that courtroom. Because each one of the 5 Pandavas was a dear friend and great devotee of Krishna. And of course, there's others there who loved him deeply as well. So he has to pick everyone up. And in order to do that, he recites this verse, which is a verse about the Bhagavad Gita. So this is back to 1:15:27. Desha-kalartha yuktani Triktapo-pashamani cha Nanti smaratas chittam Govinda Vihitani me Deshakala Yuktani Rittabo Pashamani Cha Ananti Smaratas Chittam Govinda Vihitani me. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Now I am attracted to those instructions imparted to me by the personality of Godhead, Govinda, because they are impregnated with instructions for relieving the burning heart in all circumstances of time and space. Please repeat. Now I am attracted to those instructions imparted to me by the personality of Godhead, Govinda, because they are impregnated with instructions for relieving the burning heart in all circumstances of time and space. Will be part of Srila Prabhupada's purport. Herein, Arjuna refers to the instruction of the Bhagavad Gita, which was imparted to him by the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The Lord left behind him the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, not for the benefit of Arjuna alone, but also for all time and in all lands. The Bhagavad Gita, being spoken by the personality of Godhead, is the essence of all Vedic wisdom. It is nicely presented by the Lord himself for all who have very little time to go through the vast Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Puranas, and Vedanta Sutras. It is put within the study of the great historical epic Mahabharata, which was especially prepared for the less intelligent class, namely the women, the laborers, and those who are worthless descendants of the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and higher sections of the Vaishyas. The problem which arose in the heart of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was solved by the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Again, after the departure of the Lord from the vision of earthly people, when Arjuna was face to face with being vanquished in his acquired power and prominence, he wanted again to remember the great teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, just to teach all concerned that the Bhagavad Gita can be consulted in all critical times, not only for solace from all kinds of mental agonies, but also for the way out of the great entanglements which may embarrass one in some critical hour. The merciful Lord left behind him the great teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, so that one can take the instructions of the Lord even when he is not visible to material eyesight. Material senses cannot have any estimation of the Supreme Lord, but by his inconceivable power, the Lord can incarnate himself to the sense perception of the conditioned souls in a suitable manner through the agency of matter, which is also another form of the Lord's manifested energy. Thus, the Bhagavad Gita, or any authentic scriptural sound representation of the Lord, is also the incarnation of the Lord. There is no difference between the sound representation of the Lord and the Lord himself. One can derive the same benefit from the Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna did in the personal presence of the Lord. We'll stop there. So Arjuna is trying to relieve Hrit Tapa Upashamanija. He's trying to relieve the burning of the heart. Tapa means burning, Hrit means heart. His heart is burning in separation from Krishna. And this is not the first time, of course, that Arjuna has felt the burning of the heart. The most famous time he felt his heart burned was some, weeks earlier, before the battle of Kurukshetra, when he was there in the middle of both armies. He says, exactly, he talks about the burning. The Vepatusha Sharire me Roma harshashcha jayate, gandivam samsrate hasta, tvakcha paridahyate. In that case, he talks about his skin burning rather than the heart burning. But he had this burning experience, this pain. And at that point too, Bhagavad Gita is what helped him, right? Krishna's instructions, his teaching. And so now again, he's thinking, if it could help me back then perhaps it will help me now. And just as importantly, if back then the Bhagavad Gita could show me which direction to go and what I needed to do at a critical juncture in my life, then even now it can do this thing. Now, I want you to think about this for 1 minute, okay? When Arjuna was in the first time his heart was burning, and Krishna gave him the instructions of Bhagavad Gita. At that point, his heart was burning because he did not want to fight. Rather, he preferred to go off to the forest to avoid the situation he was in, to meditate, right? And by hearing these instructions from Krishna, what was the result? Instead of going to the forest, Arjuna decided that he was indeed going to fight in the battle. He was going to be a man of this world and do his duty with a sense of renunciation and surrender to Krishna. Now, Arjuna is remembering the same instructions again. And this time, by remembering those instructions, what does Arjuna conclude Krishna wants him to do? Right after this moment where he's telling about Krishna's departure, the 5 Pandavas decide that they will now go to the forest or to the mountains and they're going to retire. Right? This chapter is called The Pandavas Retire Timely, that their time had come to retire, to give up. Now, think about this. Just before, the first time he heard these instructions from Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna wanted to retire, but these instructions gave him the message, no, you have to stay in the world and fight. Now he's thinking of the same instructions, and instead of getting him to retire, they're getting him to do what he had originally wanted to do, which is go to the forest. Maybe the children can play outside. It's not distracting. Thank you. So the same instruction, right? In different capacities, in different moments, is giving exactly the opposite result. The first time Arjuna wanted to go to the forest and these instructions led him to fight. The second time he wanted to fight. Actually, Arjuna just came. He just came from a failed battle with some cowherds and he lost. He had wanted to fight and he could not. And these instructions inspired him to retire. How is this even possible? How can the same set of teachings give us contradictory inspirations? And this is where I think we need to reflect on the special character of Bhagavad Gita as a scripture. The special character of a scripture. In fact, if we take a little step backward, take a big picture, I want to ask the question, what is it even that makes a book special like this? You know, there are so many works throughout the history of the world that are considered classical literature. That is, they're classics of world literature. Works that have shaped the very course of human history. The Ramayana is an example of a work that has done that. And it's shaped the culture and history, not just of India, but of much of Asia and now in the Western world. Srimad Bhagavatam is another example. The Bible is another example of a work that's changed the course of history, the Quran, right? But also non-religious works, like the books of Shakespeare, his plays and dramas, or those of Kalidasa. These are all considered classics of world literature. And if I ask to you, in your understanding, Many of you may have read some of these works, right? And here in the United States and high schools, everyone has to read works of classical literature, like Hamlet. There's so many different varieties are there. If I asked you, what is it that makes something a classic? What qualities, not just thinking about Bhagavad Gita, in general, what would you point to? What would you say? What characteristics make something a classic of literature? Yes.
And I may not agree about this for Shakespeare and for others, but I
Sure.
would say timeless and relevant.
Yes. Excellent. So timelessness, use two very important points, right? Timelessness, that it stands the test of time, right? People read it over and over and over again. Across large periods of history, hundreds of years, thousands of years, people are still reading it, right? Bhagavad Gita, 5,000 years, people are still reading it. The Bible, it's been 2,000 years, people are still reading it, right? It stands the test of time. Excellent. And the second thing is, it's relevant. That's the reason it stands the test of time. It's because it's still relevant. No one would read it if it weren't relevant to them. Somehow it still speaks to us. It spoke to people 1,000 years ago, and chances are it's still going to be speaking to people 100, 1,000 years from now. So timelessness, relevance. What else? Yes, in the back.
Diversity.
Explain that a little bit more.
Like some trials, some conflicts, something this figure out coming to do.
Excellent, excellent. So it touches something in the human condition, right? It helps us recognize that our shared humanity through the presence of struggle or trial. Because there's actually in the material world, there's less commonality when it comes to happiness, to joy. I might like palak paneer, right? And someone else can't stand spinach. So they prefer, matar paneer, right? So everyone has their different flavors and we don't enjoy the same way. Some people enjoy coming to a nice hotel. Other people enjoy camping in the woods. But one thing that we all share in common, regardless of our enjoyment, is our suffering. We all suffer in the same way. Birth, disease, old age, death, janma, mrityu, jara, vyana. And we all face similar sorts of trials and struggles. So in that shared humanity, right, if it's a story of adversity and it shows us how to get through that, this verse, Hrit Taba Vashamancha, right? It relieves the burning of the heart. Okay, then it's a classic because we can see our own story in it. Nothing is made a classic if you can't find yourself. And we can find ourselves in Arjun's story. We can find ourselves in the story of Vibhishan and Hanumanji and Lord Ramachandra. We can see that. And so it becomes classic. Excellent. So timelessness, relevance, the ability to face diversity. What else makes something a classic? Yes.
I feel like a lot of classics represent like self-actualization or like finding that perfect version of yourself.
Yes. So not only does it guide us through our trials, but it gives us a vision of who we could be, right? Our sense of what the ultimate good is, what I can aspire to. And Lord Ramachandra's story is a good example of this, right? It's a story of an ideal human being who goes through so many trials and tribulations, and yet shows us how we can aspire to be ideal in that process, right? How we can be better than ourselves. Even the Mahabharata does that, but perhaps Mahabharata does it in a more human way. We recognize that even the best person is going to fail at some point. It's going to be a struggle. Right? And how we can be the best while not being perfect at the same time. Excellent. What else? What else is a characteristic of a classic?
Sometimes it is a combination of mixed emotions, love and trust.
A lot of different emotions present in it, right? These are complex stories. Fairy tales tend not to be classics. They're too simplistic. Right? And this person is good, this person is bad, the good person destroys the bad person. It works out well. And so we give up fairy tales. As we grow up, they're not interesting to us anymore because they're not complex. The reality of this world is complex. In fact, there are classical fairy tales. They're called written by the brothers Grimm from medieval Germany. And those stories are classics because they're all actually really complex. You know the famous fairy tale of the princess who's asked to kiss a frog. And the frog, when she kisses the frog, he becomes Prince Charming. You know this one? Yeah. And she becomes, and the whole moral is that you have to love despite the package that's there and so on. And the original version of this story in Brothers Grimm, they're all at the dining table and the frog is there. And the princess is there. The princess is asked to kiss the frog to get her Prince Charming. She gets so angry at that spot that she takes the frog and smashes him against the wall. She throws the frog, which goes splat, and then out comes the prince. And she marries him. So it's a far more complex story, right? And more human. That's a much more normal reaction than any girl deciding that she's gonna kiss the frog. So my point is, yes, complexity of emotion, complexity of variety of thought, right? That makes it human because our lives are really complex and they're messy. And perhaps there's no situation as complex as Arjuna's. Perhaps like Hamlet's one as well. And Hamlet's position is also very important. But Arjun here, he's faced with these impossible choices. He can't, his one choice is that I need to be the person I'm meant to be to help the people who are depending upon me. All these citizens, the Duryodhana and his brothers were, Mahabharata describes the incarnations of demons from the lower planetary system. They were not here for the good of the world. So on the one hand, he had his responsibility to the world. And on the other hand, he had his responsibility to his family. And that's a push and pull that all of us can relate to. The tug of different obligations. This is what I need to do for the good of others. This is what I need to do for my own good, or the good of my family. It's an impossible choice. It's a very complex one. And we can go on debating for hours what the right decision would have been. But that was the point. Materially speaking, there was no good decision. Either decision would have caused so much pain and suffering to so many people. So all the classics are difficult, they're complex, they're messy, they're complicated, they're not fairy tales. I'll add a couple more. There's a professor at University of Chicago, a theologian, his name is David Tracy, and he's attempted to give a definition of a classic. And he lists all the things you mentioned, right? All of them he mentions, and a couple more he offers. That it speaks not only across vast periods of time, but also vast geographic spaces. Different cultures can appreciate it. It may not be in their language, it may not be their culture, but when they read it, they feel something. They understand something about themselves, even though it's such a different culture. So geography and culture speaks across that. And then he says, I think most profoundly, he says, a classic is a work of literature that has an excess of meaning. By that, he means that it's always overflowing with meaning. You cannot contain it. You can't read it and say, now I understood everything. There's nothing more to understand. What's next? Even after all these years, I don't know how many years you have been studying Bhagavad Gita, but perhaps 10, 20, 30, 40 years, maybe from childhood. And every time you read it, you still find something in it. You think, wow, this speaks to me. This says something I never noticed. How did I miss this? It was in this very obvious verse that I've read so many times, and yet I missed it completely. Have you had that experience before? Right. And the reason is because the text never keeps giving. It's like a well that never empties of water. a mine, a gold mine that never empties of gold. It just keeps on giving. And the more we come back to it, the more it has to offer us in different ways and meanings. It speaks to us. The book is always giving more. And that's the point with this verse. When our situation changes, then the book speaks to us differently. The words are the same, but we have changed. The instructions Arjun received on the battlefield are the same instructions he's remembering now. But what has changed? Arjun's position in life has changed. At that point, he was meant to be a man of the world. He needed to do his duty. He needed to fight on the battlefield of life. And now he's the man who's ready to retire. The same instructions, the same Krishna, the same words, speaking differently at a different time in his life. That's called an excess of meaning, an overflow of meaning. No one can contain it. This definition of a classic that all of you came up with, this is essentially a description of Bhagavad Gita. Right? This is what that book means. And this is why there are so many editions of Bhagavad Gita. People have used it for every purpose imaginable. During the fight for India's independence, Gandhiji used Bhagavad Gita to teach civil disobedience, non-violent resistance. During that same time, other freedom fighters used the same book to argue for military responses to the British. Bhagavad Gita has been used in courtrooms. It has been used for films, music, dance, drum. It's been interpreted in just about any way you can imagine, for any political, any social, cultural, religious reasons you can think of. That's what makes it a classic. And that's not something to be embarrassed by or to be angry about. That's a matter of pride, because Bhagavad Gita has been relevant for thousands of years to millions of people in so many different cultures. Even when Robert Oppenheimer, he was the leader of the the Manhattan Project, right? That discovered the first atomic bomb and tested it. When that atomic bomb exploded for the first time, the Trinity test at Los Alamos Laboratories in New Mexico, when that first atomic bomb exploded, he remembered Bhagavad Gita. 2 verses. You know the verses? Which one do you remember? Both from chapter 11. Kalosmi sarvakshayakrit pravriddho. Time I am, the great destroyer of these worlds. He translated it as death I am, the great destroyer of the world. In fact, he was such a lover of the Bhagavad Gita that when he studied at University of California, Berkeley, he specifically took classes in Sanskrit so that he could study the Gita in the original. And he always kept a little copy of the Gita bound in pink on his bookshelf, on his shelf right above his desk. And the second verse he remembered was, if 1,000 suns were to rise at the same time, that would be the brilliance of this universal form. In fact, his official biography is titled 1,000 Suns. Whatever we might think of the atomic bomb, the point is, even to him, the Bhagavad Gita spoke. And that's a classic. This is why there are so many editions of the Bhagavad Gita. So then what sets apart as it is? What's the need of another one? You see, everyone reads the Bhagavad Gita and finds in it what is useful for their own situation. When Gandhiji read Bhagavad Gita, he said that his favorite section of the Bhagavad Gita, was the last 15, 20 verses of chapter 2, where Krishna describes the Sthita Prajna, the one of steady intelligence. Arjuna asked him, Sthita pragnasya ka bhasha. How does a person of steady intelligence speak? How does he walk? How does he work? And Krishna describes a litany of qualities of how this person is balanced and equanimous and always self-controlled and works in this world without attachment to the fruits. Gandhiji was so taken by this section of Bhagavad Gita that he said that the author of the Gita had nothing further important to say after chapter. That was his, he really felt that was the climax of the Bhagavad Gita. Most Western readers of Bhagavad Gita, you know which chapter of the Gita they consider to be its climax?
6.
So it depends, right? If you're into yoga, then chapter 6, and it's mention of the control of the mind, the steadiness of the mind is it. That's the heart of the message. And if you're into more drama, then chapter 11, right? Where the cosmic form. This is the theophany. This is God's vision of who he is. Different people find different sections of the Gita that they consider to be its climax. Now, here's the attempt of the Vaishnava reader of Bhagavad Gita. The attempt of the Vaishnava author is to ask the question, which sections of the Bhagavad Gita does the Gita itself highlight as its climax, as its essence, as its important message? Because every book, every good book, has its own internal logic. It has its own system of highlighting. Every teacher has a way of conveying what's most important. That perennial question that I fear from my students is the most demoralizing question ever. Is, Professor, do we need to know this for the exams? Yeah. No, you don't need to. Right? Which is what is a signal of what? This is not important. Right? The question that the student is trying to figure out is what's important. And typically what I encourage them to do, especially when it comes to textbooks, because in class I can emphasize what's important. In the textbook, they often don't know. Say, how do we know what's important? What's going to be on the exam? And I tell them, try to look at what the author himself or herself emphasizes. If the author puts this in a footnote or in a passing comment, I'm not going to put it in the exam. I'm not trying to find the most minor point possible to trip you up. That's not my goal. But if the author is spending 2 pages talking about this one point, then yeah, it's important. So the Vaishnava reader asks, the Vaishnava commentator asks, what do we know from the internal structure of the Gita itself that can point us to its essence, to its heart? And so we have some favorite verses. And each one of those, when we look at what the internal structure itself points to, it always points to the same thing. It's Krishna. This verse that devotees like over and over again. Yoginam api sarvesham matkatenam tadakrama shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yuktamo mata. Of all the yogis, the one who is connected to me in love, worshiping me with faith, that person is the most intimately united with me in yoga. Okay, so it's a verse. Other people have other verses. But if you look at the structure, if you look at the context of that verse, what comes right before that one? Do you know? What does Krishna say? He says, tapas vibhyadiko yogi, jnanibhyopi mato. He says, this, the yogi, he says, tasmad yogi bhavarjana. He says the yogi is more superior. That's it. The yogi is superior to the tapasvi, the jnani. What's the third one he mentioned? Karmi. The karmi, the jnani, and the tapasvi. The fruitive worker, the person after knowledge, and the person performing austerity. Greater than all three of these is the yogi. And then he says, of all yogis, the one who is my devotee is the best. The text itself is pointing to this. And moreover, this shows up in a chapter that is not primarily about bhakti. It's about a different process of Yagna Yoga. This is actually one of the interesting things about the Gita. I was reflecting as we were reading yesterday. If you read every chapter, this happens, I think, with maybe almost every chapter. Krishna will describe whatever is the main theme of that chapter. And then by the end of it, he says, oh, and by the way, whatever I've described here, the best among that is my devotion. Or the focus of all of this is actually me. Or you don't have to worry about all this if you are my devotee. So he says, he describes the process of karma in chapter 3. And then he says, and you have to offer all of that karma to me. He describes the process of departing this world in chapter 8. In the first 6 months, and the second 6 months, and in the bright half of the month, and he says, actually, but if you're my devotee, you don't have to worry about me. He describes his grand 11th chapter vision. And then at the end of it, he says, the only person who can see this form, that vision, and this personal form is my devotee. You can't understand me through other things. He describes chapter 5, all the different types of sacrifices. You can be brahmachari, you can sacrifice like this, do this austerity. He says, actually, in the end, I'm the one who's the recipient of all these sacrifices. Chapter 6, you should meditate like this, not too high, not too low, like this. He describes everything stare at the tip of your nose. Arjun says, I can't do this. Krishna says, yes, you can. If you practice, if you meditate, if you abhyasa yoga yukena, by practice, you can do it. At the end, he says, of all the yogis, my devotee is the greatest. He does this when the chapter where he describes the 3 modes of material nature, when he first introduced it in chapter 13. And Arjun says, how can I be transcendental to these 3 modes? Krishna says, Sagunan Samadityetan Brahmaviyaya Kalpati. And my devotee is the one who is beyond these things. This happens every single time. Next time you read Bhagavad Gita in recitation, you pay attention to the translations, watch this happen. Every single chapter, Krishna comes back and he says, me, me, me. It's me. I'm the focus here. Just in case Arjun misses it, Krishna then points it out even more clearly. He says, chapter 9, he says, I'm now going to give you the most confidential knowledge. And that's the conclusion of chapter 9. He says, think of me, become my devotee, offer your homage unto me. In this way you will come to me, I promise you. Chapter 9, he says this. My most confidential. Why is that chapter considered the most confidential? Because Krishna says it is. Then fast forward all the way to the end of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna ends the Gita. He's done. And he says, Arjun, think about this. Vimrishya. And then, yatechasi tathatu. Do as you desire. Right? Which means the book is finished. The instructions are done. That's the end of Bhagavad Gita. I have now told you what I wanted to tell you. Think about it and then do what you like to do. If Ashochan and Vashochaswam is the first teaching, this is the last teaching. Krishna is done now. Structurally speaking, Gita is finished. And yet, after he says, do whatever you like, he says, but if you want to know what I think you should do, let me remind you of my supreme instruction Sarva guhya tamam bhuya. The word bhuya means again. I'm going to give you my highest secret again. Why again? Because he already said it in chapter 9.
Yeah.
So Krishna literally repeats himself because the last verse of chapter 9 is 3 lines of the 4 lines. 3/4 of it is exactly the same as what he's going to say now, which is Manmana Bhagavat Madhyaji Mahamastu Mami Vaishyasi Satyam De Pratijava Priyus. This time, all he alters is just a phrase, Pratijava. I promise you, because he's really getting to the end. So he's adding a little more punch to it. Like, I promise you. He's repeating himself. It's like a parent, when the child grows up and he's 18 or 19 or whatever, and the parent says, I've taught you in your life, and I've told you everything that you need to know. You're well trained, you're a good person. Now go off and live your life. You should make your own choices now. Make your own mistakes. And the child takes the first step out of the house, the first decision, the parent's like, whoa, what are you doing here? This is not the right thing to do. You should do this, right? This is why? Because they can't bear to see the child make the wrong decision. Yes, they want them to grow up and do their own thing. But I care too much, right? Anyone else can make their mistakes. You don't make any mistakes. Do the right thing. Krishna's like that to Arjuna. At the end of the Gita, he's telling Arjuna, Yatechasi tathaku, do as you like. And then he comes around and he says, but don't do that, okay? Don't do that. Do this, please, surrender to me. Because this is what's going to be good for you. So if we look at the Gita structure over and over again, Krishna points us to the same direction. And that direction, over and over again, in every chapter, every important verse. Oh, one more I forgot. Chapter 10. You know the 4 essential verses of the Bhagavad Gita? Aham sarvasya prabhavo matsa sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante without bhavas. And there's 3 more after that. These 4 are considered the essential verses of the Bhagavad Gita by our Vaishnava acharyas. Why are they considered the essential verses? Why can't I just choose any other 4 verses that I really like and consider them the essential verses? Is it just their personal preference? No, you see it in the structure of the Gita. What happens after Krishna gives these 4 essential verses? Anyone remember? Arjuna has this outburst of happiness, of joy. He says, Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan, Purusham Shashvatam Divyam, Adidevam Ajam Vitu. He says, Krishna, I accept what you're telling me. You are the supreme person. He has this outburst that both in its meaning and in the words themselves are different than anything Arjuna said. So far, Arjuna has had 2 types of statements in the Gita before chapter 10. One is expressing his depression to Krishna, why he's so sad and heartbroken. And second, he's had questions, doubts that propel the Gita slowly. Never a word of praise, never a word of acceptance. But after these 4 verses, Arjuna's mood changes for the first time. He's so ecstatic. He can't control himself. He's repeating, Param Brahma, Param Dham, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam. This is redundancy in the Sanskrit. Param, Param, Param. Once is enough. But the only reason someone keeps saying the same thing over and over again is when they can't contain it. When they can't hold it down. Either they're ecstatic or they're afraid, or some emotion is really powerful. They can't hold it. These 4 verses cause a shift in Arjuna's character. So therefore, they're considered essential verses of the Gita. Why is chapter 11 considered to be the key chapter? Because the Bhagavad Gita's own structure doesn't describe it as that. Arjuna himself is not impressed in the end by chapter 11. He's impressed, sorry. He's impressed. He's not convinced in chapter 11. He's impressed. He's scared. He's nervous. But even after that frightening theophany, that drama, it still takes Krishna another 7 chapters to convince him to do what he wants. 7 chapters, it still takes him. Arjuna essentially says, I can't handle this form of yours. And he's not convinced. It's only in the 18th chapter where he says, Karishye vachanam tam. I'm going to do what you ask me. Therefore, that's the climax of the Gita, not chapter 11. Okay. So the principle of Vaishnava interpretation, what I'm describing here, has a lot of technical terms as well to it. But this principle of Vaishnava explanation or interpretation is take the primary meaning of the text. This is called mukhya vritti in Sanskrit. Mukhya means essential or primary. What is the plain meaning of the book itself? If you put it down and you look at the structure of the text and you see where the author or the teacher is pointing, where will you end up? Once you grasp that meaning, then you can branch out and find other applications. There's nothing wrong in finding more, because that's the nature of the book, right? Of a classic. It's always overflowing in meaning. So there's nothing wrong in finding more after you have isolated the primary meaning. Once you know what it is as it is, then you can explain as it could be, as it should be, as it might be, as it was. All those possibilities are there. But first, you need to take it as it is. This phrase, as it is the heart of Vaishnava understanding of any scripture, not just Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, Ramayana, anything. What does the text say about itself first? And once you identify that or get a good sense, then you can go other places and explore and find further application, because then you're grounded. You're grounded in the foundation of it that provides you a basis so that when you leap off, you're not totally unmoored, right? We don't fall down and flat and get lost. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu meets Prakashananda Saraswati, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and they have this wonderful debate about Vedanta, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's only criticism to Prakashananda is take the primary meaning of the Vedanta Sutta, of the text. Start there. Then the book will give you limitless other meanings. There is nothing wrong in seeing the Bhagavad Gita as a metaphor for life. Remember, Prabhupada criticizes interpretations of the Gita which regard Krishna as the self, and Arjuna as the self, Krishna as the conscience, the chariot as the body, the battlefield as the battlefield of life. There's nothing wrong in this, so long as we start recognizing that Krishna is the point. And then, of course, we want to see Bhagavad Gita as an example for our life. Of course, this world is a battlefield. Anyone who's lived through life knows it's a struggle. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, we want Krishna to guide us as a supersoul within our mind. Conscience is another way of referring to the supersoul. So there's nothing wrong in going there, so long as we start with as it is. And as it is means all these pointers in the internal structure of the Gita point to one thing, and that's Krishna. Everywhere we go, it's perhaps Krishna's favorite word in Bhagavad Gita is aham, or ma, which is the word mat in Sanskrit is just the stem form of aham. So aham, nam, mai, mat, they're all different versions of the same word. And Krishna uses this word over and over and over again. Where does he use it the most? Chapter 10. He says, Asmi, I am, aham. But all throughout the Gita, matvan, think of this, focus on me. In fact, this is perhaps a litmus test for any commentaries of the Bhagavad Gita you encounter. Just this one simple thing for a commentary is how is the word aham or I explained? How did the commentator explain the word I? There's this beautiful verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaturshloki, the 4 essential verses of the Gita Bhagavatam, where Krishna says, Aham evasam evagre. In the beginning, only I existed. And all the commentators spend a lot of time talking about this simple word, I. What does I mean? What does aham mean? This word aham is the root of our problems, and it's the pathway to our liberation. Just this word, I, aham. When we take this aham, this I, and we misdirect it towards ourselves, that becomes aham God. Gada means to construct or to build. In Sanskrit, Gada means to construct. When we construct a false sense of I, that's the cause of our problems. I am the king. Ishwaroham, aham bhogi, siddhoham, palavan sukhi. I am the king. I'm the enjoyer. I'm the supreme. And you take that same I and you direct it towards Krishna, and that I becomes the cause of our liberation. To recognize that it's not about I, it's about I. And it's not about me, it's about him. In Sanskrit, the third person, there's 3 people, right? In grammar, there's he, she, or it. There's you, and there's I. 3 people in grammar. And in English, we call this the first person. You are the second person, and he, she, or it is the third person. In Sanskrit, it's the opposite. He or she is the first person, because that's the person you're talking to. You are the second person, and I am the last person. Pratama Purusha. The second is the Vidya Purusha. Then this is the Uttama Purusha. But here's the thing. The last person, Uttama Purusha, the word Uttama also means the highest, the supreme person. So that I is not only the last person when it refers to us, but it's the supreme person because it refers to Krishna. And that word I, Prabhupada has this beautiful purport in Srimad Bhagavatam, that verse where he talks about the creator I and the created I. He says, when the created I, that's us, recognizes the creator I, that's Krishna, then at that point, all problems are solved. Everything becomes one. It becomes perfect. So when it comes to translations of Bhagavad Gita, to commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, this is really the only thing we have to offer to the world, is Krishna, is that I, that one person who is behind everything. Because otherwise, there are a lot of brilliant commentaries on the Gita. And they have a lot of very, very good things to say. And I mean that genuinely. There's a lot of brilliant ideas, wonderful applications. If you want a political application of the Bhagavad Gita, There's no one more brilliant to offer it than Gandhiji. He really does an incredible job of taking Bhagavad Gita and applying it to a political circumstance to liberate a whole nation. If you want Bhagavad Gita as a work of literature, there's beautiful translations and commentaries out there. There's a lot of ways of reading and studying Bhagavad Gita. What is it that we have to offer to the world? What is it that Prabhupada has to offer to the world? That's an unvarnished, de-agendified, there's another word like that, de-agendified edition, understanding of the Gita that points us to what the author points himself. And that's Krishna. That's himself. And that's what Arjuna is demonstrating in this verse. After all of this life's journey, he's had a very difficult life. What he comes back to in the end is Krishna, the heart of Bhagavad Gita. That my friend, my charioteer, my teacher, my relative, he names Krishna in all these ways. That person is the one that I need to remember, I need to think about. And that will help relieve the burning in my heart. Fit tapa upashamanicha. In any circumstance, desha kalartha yuga, in any circumstance, this Bhagavad Gita. So what we have with us is a classic. It's a classic of world literature, one that has no end to what it can offer to the world. And when we give it out into the world, we can sit back and watch how it does its magic in the world. The Gita, how it speaks to so many varieties of people in so many ways, and how to this day, people find applications to the Gita that could not have been imagined 5,000 years ago by any reader back then. Applications in management, applications in nuclear warfare, applications in ecology and environment. The Bhagavad Gita has it all for us. So long as we start in the right place. We start with the essence. All right, I will stop there. Thank you all so much for your attention. So, what time was I supposed to end? We started at 10, right? Oh my gosh.
No, after the introduction, you're right on time.
Was it more than an hour? My apologies. So Sripalal Prabhu is coming after me, and I hope I didn't take his time away. Okay. Thank you all so much. I'm sorry if I went a little over.
Thank you, Radhika, Raman, Prabhu, for such a brilliant exposition of the Bhagavad Gita messages.